welcome. Is everyone here and seated? Yes, hello, hi, we shall begin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session today, which is around job creation for people with intellectual disabilities. My name is Theresa Shearer. I am a white woman. Today, I am wearing white trousers with a navy blazer. I have blonde hair, and you may also notice I am speaking with a Scottish accent that is also slightly Irish. Thank you for joining us here today. We are going to run our session today as a panel session. I'm going to make a few opening remarks, and when I finish my opening remarks, I'm going to hand over to our three wonderful speakers. Our three wonderful speakers will then speak for around 10 minutes on their, 8 minutes I'm told. Okay, well I'll go for 10, let's see how we get on. So for 8 to 10 minutes on their particular work around creating jobs for people with intellectual disabilities, but more importantly, how we support people with intellectual disabilities to have amazing careers within the workforce and to be retained within the workforce, to retain and unleash their potential, to help not just them as individuals, but to help organisations, and probably most importantly in such difficult times, to help with our economic prosperity across Europe and indeed the rest of the world. We'll talk a lot today around inclusion and around diversity. Now, I'm very conscious that over the past couple of months in particular, there has been somewhat of a backlash across the phrase D, E and I. The organisation that I work for, Enable, has a phrase which says D, E and I is in our DNA. And so despite whatever backlashes might be happening politically, we are very focused, particularly on diversity and inclusion, when it comes to working with and supporting people with intellectual disabilities to have their rightful place in the workforce. We've done that in Scotland in a couple of different ways, and indeed across the UK in a couple of different ways over the past couple of years. One of the most important policy drivers we have seen in the UK for supporting people with intellectual disabilities to access the workplace and to, in fact, go on and have careers within the workplace in exactly the same way as everyone else within the workplace does, is through the Shinquin Commission with the House of Lords and the Institute of Directors. Now, that particular commission looked at the barriers to people with disabilities, and in particular intellectual disabilities, to look at how organisations can best embrace and support people with disabilities to become active participants in their organisations. We have seen that this is good not just for individuals and not just from a human rights perspective, but also from a business perspective. And indeed, Accenture, the global consulting firm, in 2023 noted huge changes in both income streams and profitability of organisations that positively and authentically supported people with disabilities and intellectual disabilities in particular to access work in their workplaces. So accessing the whole of the talents within our society is not just the right thing to do, but it is proven time and time again through academic research to be one of the most important things high-performing organisations can and in fact should do. This is particularly important from a European perspective when we think about Article 27, and I'm just going to quote Article 27 precisely here because I think it's a really good introduction to what some of our speakers will be talking about. The right of persons with disabilities to work on an equal basis. This includes the right to the opportunity to gain a living by work freely chosen or accepted on an equal basis in the labour market and in an open environment. That environment should be inclusive and accessible to all people with disabilities. So if we think about the UN CRPD, and particularly if we think about Article 27, then we understand that we have an obligation to do the right thing in terms of our workforces. But if we think about it from an organisational perspective, we also understand, and the data tells us, it is a particularly good thing for high-performing organisations to be inclusive. Now, some of the recent data has shown us that there has been an increase in the number of people with disabilities in the workforce. Again, if we look at the UK as an example, but this has been borne out across Europe and indeed the rest of the world, between 2019 and 2024, there was a 34% uplift in the number of people with disabilities in the workforce. So on the face of it, we should be celebrating that huge change. However, we might argue that that huge change has been brought about for some very specific reasons. So only 10% of that number are new entrants with disabilities to the workforce. Actually, the biggest change globally in people entering the workforce with disabilities, and particularly intellectual disabilities, would be if something happened to them throughout the course of their career. So, for example, we know that many people have an acquired brain injury at a certain part in their life, or people develop disabilities more generally. So organisations need to be open to people with disabilities in their workforce, not just because of new entrants to the market, but indeed because the data tells us many more people are entering the workforce and staying in the workforce and then developing disabilities later in life. So we're going to look at a few of these different issues throughout today's session. One of the things that I think is very important is to think about that point around economic prosperity. And again, if I use my own country as an example, we have a situation just now where almost 20% of the working population are not in work. And a huge section of that are people with disabilities. In fact, the employment disability gap for people with intellectual disabilities is over 70%. So there is huge potential for us to do better, not just as a society from a human rights perspective, but also to encourage and to create higher business performance and higher productivity. We're going to hear from three speakers today. We're going to hear from Matthew Gallery, who is with us to my right. We're also going to hear from Michael Longhino. But before we hear from Matthew and Michael, I'd like to just point out Petra, who will be doing the graphic facilitation for today's session. And at the end of the session, Petra will give a quick synopsis of some of the key points that we've discussed. But before Matthew and Michael, I would first like to introduce you on my far right to Professor Matthias Morfeld. Professor Matthias Morfeld is from the University of Applied Sciences in Magdeburg-Stendal in Germany. And he's here to tell us a little bit more about his award-winning Zero Project, where he supports people with intellectual disabilities into the education space. So he supports people into becoming education specialists. So with that in mind, can I please hand you over to our first speaker and give a very warm welcome to Professor Matthias Morfeld.
Yes, thank you for the friendly introduction and welcome. My name is Matthias Morfeld. I'm a tall man of almost 2 meters, wear glasses, and my hair is gray, but my age remains secret. Today I would like to introduce you to the concept of inclusive education at universities. This model is based on the triad of education, work, and multiplication, and aims to enable people with intellectual disabilities to participate equally in the labor market. Why the triad? With our work, we not only comply with the requirements of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities regarding work and education, but we also raise awareness not only of the concerns of people with disabilities, but also of the potential that these individuals have for the general labor market. Der Grüne? Yeah. The initial situation in Germany, a segregated labor market. Unfortunately, the labor market in Germany is still highly segregated. People with intellectual disabilities often work in sheltered workshops for people with disabilities, so-called VFBM. The transition rate from these workshops to the general labor market is below 1%. This means that out of the approximately 310,000 workshop employees, only a minimal percentage has a chance to regular employment. In addition, the average income is only 222 euros per month. These figures highlight the urgent need for new approaches to offer people with intellectual disabilities better opportunities for equal participation in the labor market. Educational specialists, the qualification. To address this problem, we focus on qualifying people with intellectual disabilities to become educational specialists. This training includes both subject-specific and methodological, didactic and social skills. The education specialists undergo a practical 3-year full-time qualification that prepares them for the future educational tasks. 2 of the so-called education specialists are also present here today. Frau Herkula und Herr Gebner, können Sie vielleicht kurz mal aufstehen und kurz mal winken? Now you know that they really exist. Ha. Wonderworld of techniques. Okay. Educational specialists, the employment. After completing their qualification, educational specialists can work at universities and educational institutions, and they have permanent employees of the university. They take on various tasks, such as teaching inclusive educational methods, coaching students, and giving lectures about their own experiences. They are perceived as experts in their own right and actively contribute to raising awareness of inclusive education. The impact. The integration of educational specialists has positive effects on the multiple levels. It promotes inclusion at universities. It creates job opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities. It raises awareness among students and faculty about the challenges and potential of inclusive education. It acts as a multiplier by contributing to a change in societal awareness. Let me make a short conclusion. In summary, training people with intellectual disabilities to become educational specialists represents a promising opportunity to make the labor market more inclusive. Education, work, and multiplication are the key concepts that enable sustainable change. Thank you for your attention, and I warmly invite you to participate in the forum of self-advocates of people with learning difficulties. This will take place on Friday, 1:15 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. in room M3 and will be offered with English translation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you for that wonderful presentation and for your remarks. It's my absolute honour this afternoon, and I have the privilege of doing lots of events like this, but I very rarely get the ability to introduce someone who I know personally, who I have seen their work, and who I've heard all about their work over the past couple of years. And to make it even more special, the young man who I'm about to introduce you to is working with one of the projects that I had the privilege of founding almost 10 years ago that has gone on from strength to strength. So I would like you to give the warmest welcome of Zero Conference so far to my friend and colleague, Matthew Gallery.
Thank you, Theresa. Hi, I'm Matthew. I'm a white male. I'm wearing dark grey trousers and a light grey shirt. I have glasses and a red beard. So, Breaking Barriers is a groundbreaking partnership supporting young people who have a learning disability and allows them to have the opportunity to have one of the leading universities achieve an accredited qualification and gain great work experience with some of the country's largest employers. Founded by Enable, the University of Strathclyde Business School and Scottish Power, the flagship programme has now expanded to the University of Strathclyde Faculty of Science and to Edinburgh's Napier University, with additional corporate partners including EY, Balfour Beatty and Dayforce. When Enable launched Breaking Barriers in 2018, only 4% of school leavers who had a learning disability went into higher education, compared to the 46% of all school leavers. Since then, 7.5% of the school leavers who have a learning disability have gone into higher education. 185 young people have now graduated from the Breaking Barriers programme, with 95% of the students moving into positive progressions and upon completion of the programme. Graduates have gone on to work in a range of fields, including paramedicine with the NHS, financial services with Barclays, policy with the Scottish Government, legal services for Enable, cybersecurity, filmmaking, and digital music. Before being introduced to Enable, I was feeling really anxious and frustrated that I didn't have the skills or confidence to go into interviews and progress into my work life. I also felt my disabilities held me back. I was then introduced to Enable and the programme Breaking Barriers lead, Lewis. I felt anxious at the thought of attending university due to having dyspraxia and being autistic. I was supported on the course from Lewis and Enable from start to finish, meeting me one-on-one to discuss any challenges and creating a personalised learning plan detailing my barriers and any adjustments I needed. Due to the support and combined with the workshops covering a range of skills, I was able to pass this course and graduate not only with the certificate, but a confidence and belief in myself to progress with my career. And that is exactly what happened. After graduating, I secured a paid traineeship with SSE. I was finally accepted for a paid job, which I was extremely happy about, as I tried for so long to get a job and was getting nowhere, and I had finally been successful. I don't think I'd been able to have secured the job without completing the Breaking Barriers programme, and more specifically, being exposed to the energy sector through the programme's work placement. During my time with SSE, I learned more about accounts, processing invoices, and liaising with contractors and helping with any inquiries they may have had. During this, I gained various skills in computer systems, gaining skills at Excel and Harmony IT systems. After I completed my traineeship at SSE, this opened up a new door for me to secure a year-in industry position with Scottish Power as a technical trainee assistant analyst within the HR department. Through this role, I have been able to continue to develop my IT skills. Part of my role here has been updating training plans, liaising with contractors offshore, booking in delegates for training days, and booking out training rooms. Through this role, I have developed much better communication skills, improved my networking skills, and ultimately develop more confidence. I have been supported well from colleagues and the programme during this time. With regards to my disabilities, I would say that due to the Breaking Barriers programme, I have been able to overcome my barriers, and I also feel having Enable and Lewis in the background, if needed, provides me with great comfort, and I can keep progressing and developing my career. And I know now that my barriers will not hold me back. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Matthew, for that wonderful run-through of such a great programme, Breaking Barriers. And I should just let people know that both Matthew and Joe, who are one of our ambassadors for Breaking Barriers, will be around after today's session. So if anyone has any specific questions, they're more than happy to answer those. However, it's not all about Scotland today. You'll be glad to hear we have some homegrown talent for you coming up next. So might I ask if you can to raise your hand if you've come here from Austria today? So do we have some people from Austria? Great, because you're about to hear the story of one of your preeminent learning disability organisations who have done some great work here in your home country. So it's with great honour that I introduce you to Michael Longhino from Chance B to talk about some of the fabulous work that's happening here in Austria today that we can all learn from and take back to our respective countries. So with that, I will hand you over to Michael.
Thank you, Theresa. Thank you, Theresa. Yes, just checking concerning the PowerPoint presentation. Oh. Yeah. Okay, I also have some technical problems. Yes, thank you very much for having me here. I'm a male person, around 43 years old. I'm 1 meter and 80 centimeters tall, wearing a blue jacket, a white shirt, and jeans. I'm very happy to be here to introduce our initiative ComCom and the ComCom network, which we started to develop 10 years ago. So also this project has some background. Just a few words where I come from. The organization I'm representing is Chance B. We are a social service provider in a rural area in Austria. We are delivering around 33 different social services to persons in our area who need support. And what is very important for us is that our focus is on strengthening people in the field of employment to find their way to the first labor market. But not only finding a job, but also fostering the talents and the potentials of our colleagues with disability through a qualification project and program. As Matthias already said, he was explaining the situation in Germany. I think Austria and Germany in that sense are quite similar. Around 25,000 persons with a disability are not in the open labor market, are working in sheltered workshops and do not get a fully insured work contract. So they have pocket money, and 10 years ago, the idea was that Chance B wants to support persons with a disability to find their way to the first labor market. And now, since 2021, we are not all alone. We founded the ComCom network. So other organizations in Austria from 5 different countries in Austria are now part of the network. So it is spread out from the eastern part of Styria in the south of Austria to almost every region in Austria. What is our approach? Our qualification program is a work-based approach. So we are trying to qualify our trainees in a work-based environment, and we are cooperating with companies on the first labor market. So the trainees are not in our educational settings in Chance B. They are learning at companies on the first labor market. And also the aim of the qualification process is, in the end, to find a job in the companies where the persons are learning. So the idea of our approach is a competence-oriented approach, and it is very important to allow individualized learning pathways for our trainees. So there's not a qualification like one size fits all. It is a very individual way, a very inspiring journey towards a job, towards a qualification certificate, and which is also important that our qualifications are related to the national qualification framework in Austria, which is an EU initiative to compare different forms of education in Europe, and we are the first provider in Austria who offers qualifications related to the NQF on the levels 1, 2, and 3. And if you have in Austria an apprenticeship qualification, you are on level 4 of the qualification framework. So it was very important for us to highlight the competences and the talents of persons who do not yet reach that level of qualification 4, and to show that even on level 1, 2, 3, a lot of competences are there, and a lot of demand for workforce on the open labor market is there, and we want to match that needs. Yes. Just checking what I've already said. Yes, what is also very important, that the access to the program in Austria is for free. We implemented an online learning platform where our partner organizations can access to, and it is also very important for the program that it is not related to a special kind of service or special kind of, let's say, funding stream in Austria for services for persons with disabilities or disadvantaged learners. It is a cross-provider program, very open to existing services and other qualification programs for persons with disabilities, because our qualification approach represents a methodology of learning, it represents a culture of learning, so it is easily adaptable to different learning settings, but also to different settings for support services for persons with disabilities. Our approach also helps persons with disabilities to find their own way of learning and to find their own speed of progressing in the qualification program. So it is very important that self-assessment is taking place, so that our trainees can really reflect their own way towards more competences. Also, of course, our key staff, our trainers, are reflecting the learning with our trainees, so they get feedback from the trainers. And, of course, at the end, the idea is of getting the certificate on one of the 3 different levels. Also important that when we start the qualification, we do not put our trainees in a box and we say, you will have a qualification certificate on level 1 and you will have one on level 3. So the learners can start their journey all together, and through the 1 or 2 years of learning, at the end it shows up how far the journey has gone, whether they get a certificate on level 1, 2, or 3. as I already said, we are using a digital tool, a digital platform, where the self-assessment and the assessment of the competences is taking place. And the end of the journey is a certificate. What is very important for organizations who want to join in is that we are very open to any of Austrian organizations, and even we can think of expanding the network on European level, that every interested organizations can join in. We do not charge a fee for the network, but the idea of the network is that every organization is joining in, also bring in their own experience, their own ideas, so that we can develop new qualifications together, and to enforce the idea of the ComCom approach, making qualifications visible for persons with disabilities. And the more organizations we are working together in this important topic, the more also on the first labor market persons with disabilities who have the certificate will have better chances to get a job on the first labor market. At the moment, we are quite successful. 10% of all our trainees get a job on the first labor market fully employed, and 20% more get a part-time job. So I think we could show that it's very important for persons with disabilities not only to find a job on the first labor market, but to explore their talents, explore their possibilities, further develop, and then start a learning career which hopefully lasts a whole life. Thank you for that.
Michael, thank you very much for that, and I'm sure all of the Austrians in the room are very proud to hear of that work that you and your organisation are doing. One of the reasons that we're all here at this conference this year, and indeed many people are repeat returners to this conference for exactly this reason, is to try and find out what is happening in other countries and other geographies that we can take back to our own home countries. And so that idea of scaling something that works, that idea of transferring knowledge, I think is very important. And with that, I wanted to open up some questions, first to Matthias, if I may. Matthias, your explanation of the work of your organisation in Germany was wonderful, but if I've picked up on it properly, you're very much focused on education and the education sector. And I wondered if you had any thoughts around expanding that work, either beyond education or indeed to other activities. If you could perhaps give us some thoughts and some insights that you currently have around how you can perhaps scale the great work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you for what I consider to be an important question. Yes, here again a plea for creative approaches. Is it not conceivable to train and employ people with disabilities as accompanying staff for northern staff or teachers in kindergartens, to professional fields in which there is a dramatic lack of personnel, not only in Germany? For this, we need the following courageous and creative approaches. Against the background of the rigid German training system, we have to design training courses that take into account and implement the needs of people with disabilities right from the start in training, but also later in professional life. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that answer. I think we've heard a lot today, haven't we, about the importance of organisations in changing society's aspects and perceptions of people with learning disabilities, and how we might change some of those processes to help people into the workplace. But I'm very interested in the human side of that psychology, and I wondered, Matthew, if you might give us some insights into your personal journey and how it's felt being part of that award-winning Breaking Barriers programme, and indeed the difference it's made to your life on a very personal basis, if you might share that with the audience.
Okay, so like I said earlier, I was going for interviews, and I wasn't really getting anywhere for a long time because I didn't have the skills. Then a couple of years ago, I heard about Enable, and through that, it was through a family friend that I heard about that, and I contacted them, and they organised the Breaking Barriers. I originally said no to it because I just didn't know how I'd be able to do with it, because I've got quite a lot of difficulty with movements and things like that, and obviously due to dyspraxia. So once I found out that it was a supported course, I went home, thought about it, and decided to go for it. So once I had done that, I had met everyone in the class. They were really nice, and we learned stuff like interviews, skills, how to manage your time, and things like that. So once we'd done that, we went to the university, we met the staff there, and we got told what the course was all about. We signed up to that, so that was an experience, getting a tour of the university. And we had, the course was of 2 parts. It was, one side of it was practical at the university, so that included things like science-based labs and doing some experiments there. And we had a placement with Alphabeti, which involved learning the ropes about the work and some of how science works in construction. We did that, and through that I ended up in SSE. I don't think I would have got the job if I hadn't did the course. It has changed my life that way. It's gave me so much more skills, more confidence, and I'm definitely better at communicating, thinking how I feel, and yeah, it's just been a better experience for me. It's been really positive.
Matthew, we were talking in the break earlier about one of the things that happened with breaking barriers before COVID, and that was around the international journey. So one of the things that happened with breaking barriers right at the start of the programme was students were able to not just study in a university in Scotland, but indeed access another university. And actually for a number of the students who are here with us today, that was in Madrid. So you had a suggestion for me, I think, around what we might want to do again. Do you want to perhaps share that with the audience?
Yeah, obviously I think, any kind of programme that leads to employment and stuff is really good, so anything that promotes that and things would be brilliant.
Great, great. I think one of the things that Matthew and indeed our colleague Joe was talking about was the idea of internationalisation and actually young people going into the workplace, and the same as most of our students would expect in our universities, having that ability to visit, say, Madrid, for example. So I think that was really important. And just another stat, which I think is important from the programme that Matthew's talking about, 78% of those young people go on to work in industry following that programme. So in terms of all of the programmes that are run at Enable Scotland and indeed the employability landscape in Scotland, that particular programme has one of the, if not the highest rates of destinations into employment and into industry. So I definitely think there's something there in terms of thinking about how we scale that across Europe. But Matthew, thank you for that. We will move now on to Michael. Michael, what you described, I think, which was very interesting, was the journey of an entrepreneur. But forgive me if I don't think you're much like Richard Branson. Not that I think Richard Branson doesn't have a heart. I'm sure he does, and he does a lot of good work. But that idea of a typical entrepreneur we think of in the private sector and in industry, and what you've shown, I think, is something of a social entrepreneur, if that's a term you're comfortable with, that you have started something and really taken it to an amazing position. What would be your advice to people who are thinking about starting or founding something in the space that you have?
So I would say to have a career in the field of a social entrepreneur, I think it is very important for everyone in our field and in our area where we are that we work together closely. All entrepreneurs in our region, all businesses should have a clear position that we raise all the potentials of our users, of our workforce we have in the region. And I think what our program shows is that that there is a lot of need of experts in different fields. We have a lot of branches we are working together with, and I think that to have that very close connection between different businesses, between different initiatives, is a success factor for what we are doing. And to encourage, on one hand, our colleagues with disabilities to be open for new adventures, to be open for new job possibilities is one hand, and on the other hand to find more partners, business partners, but also other organizations who work together, that we can really also have the need of the economy in our region in mind, who need qualified staff, who need workforce, and if we all work together in that field to have a clear vision where we want to go together, I think this is a good way to do in the future.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that answer. I have a sneaky final question before I open to questions for the floor for Matthias, if I may. And sorry, we didn't get the chance to talk much in the break. We often talk about, I particularly enjoy the work I do with the European Association of Service Providers, which looks after 20,000 service providers throughout the whole of Europe. Fabulous organisation doing great work, but like most organisations, we often tussle with, well, how do we meet our mission? And one of the ways that we meet our mission is not just to work with each other, but in fact to work in an ecosystem, and to work in an ecosystem of NGOs, with government and business, but particularly with our university sector. So in Scotland, we call that the quadruple helix. I'm not sure how much that translates, but that idea of NGOs, government, business, and universities having a key proposition in supporting people into employment as part of that ecosystem. In your view, Matthias, how important is our university sector in these social missions that we're trying to achieve?
Given that the integration rate into the general labor market from the workshops for people with disabilities is not optimal, we need, I think, new ways, such as increasing knowledge about the great potential of people with disabilities in companies, but also more knowledge about the funding instruments that the Federal Employment Agency has available for companies. Let me give another example. Disability law plays little to no role in business administration courses at universities, for example. Where are young managers supposed to get knowledge about the potential of people in companies? So a plea for creative methods of knowledge transfer and integration to inclusion in work and operations.
I think that's a fabulous answer, and particularly the point about how do we integrate the learning about disability law into our MBA courses, for example, or business administration courses, so that our future leaders look at disability as a competitive advantage in terms of what our workforce and what our people have to offer. So thank you for that, much appreciated. Before I hand over to Petra, we have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to ask the audience if there's anything that you've heard today or any of the stories from our speakers that you would like to ask a further question of. So I believe there are some mics around the room. May I ask if you can raise your hand if there's something that you would like to ask one of our speakers today? Yes, we have one over here on the left, I think.
I heard you mention that in your program, 10% finds their way into the open labor market in full employment, another 20% in part-time employment. What happens to the other 70%? what kind of activities are they involved in?
Michael, I think that was your statistic from Chance B.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As we already mentioned, the system in Austria as well as in Germany is still the case that we have a lot of sheltered workshop settings and service for persons with disabilities that are not part of the open labor market. So our aim at the moment, and I would say unfortunately, because we are working towards the situation that we overcome the system of the sheltered workshops in our region to have more people on the first labor market. But at the moment, if the persons who are having the training at Chance B cannot find immediately the way to the first labor market, they stay in the sheltered workshop settings, why they cannot find their way to the open labor market, there are very different reasons and very different barriers existing at the moment. I think one of the most important issues is that the support for companies who employ persons with disabilities who have a need of support also during their lifetime. It is not possible at the moment in Austria to have that kind of support the whole life. It's one aspect, and the other aspect is simply an aspect of financial support. Companies do not get enough let's say, support financially, so that there is enough motivation for them to give jobs to persons with disabilities at the moment. So there's a lot of things to do, I guess, in the Austrian system, but I'm looking forward because programs like our program show that a lot of companies are very open to give persons with disabilities a chance to be part of their team, and that also a lot of organizations in Austria try to further develop their services and support persons with disabilities out of the sheltered systems through to the open labor market. But yes, in Austria, maybe also in Germany, we have still a lot of work to do to reach our goals and our aims in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Michael. We have room for one more question from the floor. Oh, we have one here. Yes, thank you.
Hello, thank you for the presentations. I'm John from Gureak in Basque Country in the north of Spain, and I'm also very interested in the experience about employment for people with intellectual disabilities. So I understood that the ComCom program is a tailored program, individualized. During this training, I suppose they have not a contract, they are just in a training program. But are they receiving any money during that? How much time they are dedicating in hours or days of a week or something like that? And the second question, if ComCom would be scalable to all Austria, in comparison with the figures of Germany that your colleague said that 1% of people is doing the transition to the open labor market, which would be the rate in this case to compare programs, I mean, if possible, something like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, for you again. Yep.
Yes, thank you for the question. Indeed, as I already said, the qualification program is a training on the job program. So our trainees are really trained at companies of the first labor market. And on one hand, they get a training, but on the other hand, they really help companies to achieve their goals. So they are working in the company as well. And for us, it is very important that we, as Chance B, we have a contract with the companies where it is written down that there are different qualification aims, where also the company and the mentor who is there in the company responsible also to support the progress of learning, that they are really contributing to that aim of getting the qualification done. But on the other hand, we force companies as well to pay a certain amount of money for the workforce the trainees are giving to the company, and so this is a kind of income for our trainees, but during the time of qualification they are not fully part of the contracted workers in the company, but they get additional money. For us, it is more important that our trainees can find a job in the companies. Sometimes it's even that way that they get a job in the company and the qualification ends later on. So it is possible that you have a job and later finish the qualification certificate. But usually it's the other way around. And
Michael, in terms of Plan B, I might ask if we can take that offline, if that's okay, for after the question, because I'm very conscious that we have a wonderful graphic facilitator with us today, and I wanted to dedicate a few minutes just before we wrap up the end of today's session, and I believe there's an award ceremony that everyone wants to go to soon. So just before we wrap up, I'd like you to give a warm round of applause to Petra, who'll be doing some summation and a synopsis of today's session. Thank you, Petra.
Thank me later. Okay, let's see if the camera can capture the wall. If not, I will show it to you, and everybody else, you'll have to come here later. Yeah, while I'm moving this, yeah, we're getting there. I'm moving closer. Wait. Moving closer.
You're moving closer.
Yeah, okay. So, from this side. One major thing I would like to say again before I do the summary, it was really about job creation for people with intellectual disabilities. I know we're all on the same page, but every time we talked about people with disabilities, I guess the focus was mainly on people with intellectual disabilities, maybe neurodiversity. So, because this is a target group that we already heard that is very disadvantaged on the job market. So I'll start with the two of you, Theresa and Matthew. So we heard that you based your project and your work on Article 27 from the United Nations Convention. And this article says that everybody should have access to the labor market and choose freely where to work. And so you are supporting people so they can get full access to the workforce.
Yes.
Yeah? One of the driving policies was some major governmental decision. So this made it happen because the bigger problem in your country is that a lot of people with disabilities are unemployed. Yes. You have a high unemployment rate, and especially people with disabilities are particularly out of the labor market. And Matthew, you told us about, you learned a lot of things. One thing I wrote down was self-esteem, yes. But not only that, computer skills, accounting skills, communication skills. So with overcoming the barriers through a university program, this whole program focuses to bring people into the workforce and into the labor force. So this is a very successful program. I put this on top. You gave us some numbers. I didn't catch them all.
78%.
Whoa, okay, 78%, so that's a big number. So thank you for the great work in that case. Let's move over to Germany. And Germany and Austria have similar situations. I'll just try not to stand in the picture. So, from the University of Magdeburg, you are, the solution you're providing are experts who are educational specialists, and they're experts in their own mind and in their own right. So, self-representatives in a way, so people who speak for themselves and who are partly experts of the community of people with intellectual disabilities. So they become educational specialists, and then they can teach at the university and there create awareness and teach other people with disabilities and intellectual disabilities to then move from sheltered workshops, because you have the same situation as we have in Austria, into the labor market and thus create an inclusive labor market. So from the sad situation, a lot of sheltered workshops, and a wall between sheltered workshops and labor market, and only 1% can move to the labor market. You're changing this by educating people with intellectual disabilities to then teach others so they can go into the labor market. Did I catch that correctly? Yeah? If you want to correct something, just do it. Okay, and Michael, Chance B. I'm Austrian, I know Chance B, of course. And Chance B has been on the market for a long time. It's an NGO providing services to people with disabilities, particularly people with intellectual disabilities, and your focus is to strengthen the people. But you created the ComCom network because the sad thing is we have a similar situation in Austria as we have in Germany. We do have about 25,000 people who are not in the real labor market. Every time you see these houses, I mean labor market. They're not in the labor market, but they're in the sheltered workshops. And these are the 70% from the question here. I'll move back to that later. So your solution is you created a network throughout Austria, and you're building it further up. And what your network is doing is you do individual learning and training for people with intellectual disabilities. It's a qualification program from levels 1 to 3. Number 4, I put here Lehre. I'm sorry, I forgot the English word. Apprenticeship. No, it's not apprenticeship. No, is it apprenticeship? Okay, follow me to that later. So in German it's Lehre, so the thing where you learn a job and then you go into the labor market. But it's on level 1 to 3. And what it does, it's an inclusive learning setting, and it's teachers, technology, and at the end you get the certificate. And again, this network has been very successful. If you talk about how many people really get into the labor market, 10% do get an actual job, like full-time, so they can earn their living. And 20% do have a part-time job. And for this last question, the other 70% remain in or go back to a sheltered workshop because of some reasons why they couldn't do it yet. I think that's the message. So they might still have a chance, but for that moment they go back to the sheltered workshops. Overall, getting people out of sheltered workshops, if you want to talk about that tomorrow, 1 second. 1:15, M3, a lot of very motivated self-representatives will be there tomorrow, and they will challenge you. And we're looking forward to that. And very, very thank you for this great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petra. Thank you. So I won't do much summing up other than to say there is more than we have in common than we don't. And I think what we've heard from Germany, from Austria and from Scotland are some amazing examples given the context of each of those countries and given the context of their social policy arena. So thank you to all of the people who spoke today. But before I ask you to give them a final round of applause, may I wish everyone the best of luck this evening who is going forward for a Zero Award. I hope you all win, but I'm sure that won't happen. But can I ask you just to finish up today's session to thank Matthias and to thank Michael, but I'm going to particularly ask you to thank Matthew. And it's not favouritism, although it might be a little bit, but I think often in conferences you have people like myself who are paid to do this day in and day out, and it becomes part of our job. But the really important voices are always those ones who turn up despite the fact it's not part of your day job, Matthew, and I know that we persuaded you to come here today, and I just want to give you my personal thanks and hopefully the thanks of conference. So to all our speakers, to our graphic facilitator, and particularly to Matthew, thank you very much. And please go and visit the EASPD stand today or tomorrow.